Hey guys, welcome back to ProgramHub, and today in this episode we're going to talk about softwares and applications that can be used for architects and designing purpose and VFX. So for all those purposes, we'll be talking about the software that can be used into the new MacBook Pro with the Apple Silicon processor that can be either M1 or M1 Pro processor or the M1 Max processor. So whether you can use those softwares or not, that is a big question over here that we'll be answering. So guys, specifically, I won't be reviewing the entire softwares onto the M1 Pro or the M1 Max, but I will allow you to have an answer so that can you use those softwares on the new Apple Silicon processors or not? So that would be a big question that was actually being questioned to us from the past few days. Many of the people had been commenting this again and again and saying that please review the softwares like 3ds Max, Maya, Revit, Inventor, Mudbox. Can these softwares be actually used onto the new MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro or the M1 Max processor? Because they want to have a machine that can be utilized for one of these softwares, and can they exactly use this or not? So we will be reviewing this topic and we will be allowing you to have an answer for this in this video. So guys, into the past few days, we have actually taken up some time to test out all the softwares, whether it's actually working or not, to get you a better answer and better side of it. So firstly, before we even start up with the topic, the one thing that is required to be installed in your MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro processor or M1 Max processor is a virtual machine that can be used to install Windows in macOS. So Windows is required in macOS, and the reason for that is Autodesk, one of the prominent companies that designs softwares and develops softwares for architects as well as for designers. So if you're using one of the softwares like Maya, Revit, Inventor, or AutoCAD, so you'll be requiring to use Windows, because most of the softwares that Autodesk designs is specifically and exclusively for Windows platform. And that's the reason we need Windows in the macOS to be installed using a virtual machine. And that's one of the most important steps over here. Now, as far as virtual machines are considered in the new Apple Silicon, it becomes really critical over here, because there's one and only one company right now who provides a virtual machine virtualization for macOS with the Apple Silicon, and that's Parallels. So if you want to create a virtual machine in the new MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro or M1 Max processor, you'll be requiring to install Parallels, one of the softwares that will allow you to have a virtual machine into the new MacBooks. And guys, by the way, if you want to have a look at can Parallels perform efficiently on this or not, we have already made a video for that. You can click up onto the link in the top right corner and have a look at that video. Now let's get ahead. So there had been many more softwares, like for example, when we had the Intel variants of the MacBooks, at that time we also had Boot Camp, but that is now not supported. And along with that, we also had virtual machines like, for example, VirtualBox, VMware. So those softwares were also available for the Intel Macs, but that is not available right now. So they do not make softwares for the M1 Max. So M1 or M1 Pro or M1 Max, if you're just going up for those MacBooks, so for that, these softwares are not supported. There's one and only one company that provides the virtualization, that is Parallels. Now let's get ahead. So once you install Parallels, you'll be requiring to install Windows ARM Edition. So that is, by the way, available, so you can download that and install using Parallels. Now let's get ahead to the review of all these softwares. So firstly, if we talk about AutoCAD, so guys, there had been a large number of users who actually use the MacBook for AutoCAD. So AutoCAD is actually supported onto the MacBooks, but there is no version that is actually made for ARM64. So there is no ARM edition available of the AutoCAD. So if you want to use natively onto macOS, you'll be requiring to use Rosetta 2. That is one of the translation layers that utilizes the code that was made for x86 Intel processors. So that code has been utilized for those native Macs into the new MacBooks with the Apple Silicon. So that would be required over here. And by the way, you can get a pretty much good amount of efficiency, and we have already made a video onto that. So if you want to have a look at that video, either the link is in the top right corner, you can click up there and have a look. Now let's go ahead. So AutoCAD is working very fine natively onto macOS, but if you use that into a Windows virtual machine, so the experience is not very good. So if you're using that into Windows virtual machine, so experience is a little bit slow, sometimes laggy, sometimes the application takes some time to open up. And that is by far happening with most of the softwares of the Autodesk. So I get to the next software over here, that is Revit. So we also tried to use Revit and try to check Revit. So because it had been asked to us again and again into the comments, so we tried to test that. So it worked well. So if you want to work around with Revit into a MacBook, so it can go very well. But sometimes we feel that it's slow. The functions do not work into the right order. Sometimes there can even be bugs and errors popping up here and there. So that is one of the reasons that do not allow me to give you an answer that you should be purchasing the new MacBooks with the M1 Pro processor or M1 Max processor for using Revit. Similar things goes along with Maya as well. Maya is available natively for macOS either, but that is made for the Intel x86 version. So x86 version is available. You will be requiring to use Rosetta 2 once again to use that natively onto the macOS for the ARM64. But if you want to use Maya onto a virtual machine with Windows install, there you can get a lot of laggy performance. So I purposely tried to use that, try to test that. So I'm not a user of these softwares, but yeah, I tried to test those softwares. What I found that with just basic initial some tasks over there, we can get some slowness. So the softwares are actually working really slow. So the smoothness that I was expecting when I was using a virtual machine is not found over here. As well as even if I just go around to Mudbox, if you're using Mudbox, so there is a sad news about it that at least you can use all the above softwares. Like for example, if you're using AutoCAD, if you're using Revit, if you're using Maya, so you can use those softwares on the new MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro or M1 Max processor. At least you can use them. It can be slow, but at least you can use them. But there's a big problem with Mudbox. If you want to use Mudbox, so the problem is that it requires either Intel, Nvidia or AMD GPUs. So it does not has a function, or it does not runs on the Apple Silicon GPU. So it will not run on the Apple Silicon GPU, which will actually run into Windows virtualized environment, but it will not run on the Apple Silicon GPU. So it will require either Intel, Nvidia or AMD GPUs to run. So that is one sad news, that you cannot use in either of the way Mudbox on the new MacBooks. Getting ahead to a next software. So the next software is 3ds Max. If you want to use 3ds Max, you can use that. So, but once again, similar performances are found over here. Sometimes you'll find slowness into the performance. The opening is also sometimes slow. So one thing that I can specifically answer you right now, if you want to use any of the softwares made by Autodesk, so those softwares are specifically and exclusively made for Windows native environments. The performance that you will get into a virtualized Windows environment will not be as good as native Windows environment that you can get onto some of the Windows machines. So Windows running those softwares onto Windows machine will be much more better than running them onto a virtualized Windows environment. So that is the one reason why I would consider for you is do not go along with the MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro processor or the M1 Max processor for a use of these softwares. If you want to use, by the way, any of this software that is available natively for macOS, so that's a good case. For example, if you're using AutoCAD, so you can use that over here. There is smoothness, there is no lag into it. It is, by the way, using Rosetta 2 for translation of the x86 architecture softwares, but there is no issues into it, so it can work really well. But if you're using anything into a virtualized Windows environment, so that is something I won't recommend it to you. Guys, see, if you have a machine, if you have a secondary machine, or I will say a primary machine for all of these tasks, and you're using the MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro processor for just a little bit of task, just a little bit of use, if you're using this as a secondary machine and you have another machine that is your primary machine for all these softwares, so then at that moment of time it can be a good choice for you. But otherwise, if you're going to use this as a primary machine for any of these softwares like Revit, 3ds Max, Mudbox, especially Mudbox will not be running absolutely onto this machine. It won't be running. So if you're going to use these softwares on this machine, so this is something what I do not recommend it to you. So this is my complete overall review about all these softwares made by Autodesk. And we know one thing by Autodesk, that they make softwares exclusively for the Windows environment, and they just do not bother for the macOS environment. We do not know why, because there are very few numbered softwares that are actually available for the macOS environment. And one more thing, that since the time Apple Silicon is actually been launched last year in 2020 with the M1 processor, Autodesk has not even answered this question, that whether are they making an ARM processor version or not for the macOS support. So we haven't even found any answers like these from Autodesk. And I consider this one thing, at least, that into the past period of time, if we try to have a look, so they have made almost all the softwares exclusively for Windows platform and not for the macOS platform. And that makes to a choice that if you're going to use their softwares, you should be getting a high performance Windows machine, and that can perform really well for their softwares at least. So if you're going to use any of these softwares, I would recommend you getting a laptop or a machine with RTX 3060, RTX 3070, those kind of graphics, along with some good CPU that can provide you much more better performance. So that would be a better choice for you, rather than investing some large amount of money into these kind of machines that you cannot actually use. So that would be my consideration over here. And as far as macOS is considered, if we talk about the RAM and the CPU usage while we are using the virtual machine, it handles really well. So there's no problem in handling, but the problem is actually with the softwares. Even at the times when we are running the softwares, the RAM usage, the RAM utilization was onto a good level. So there was not a lot of swap memory being used, along with the CPU utilization was good over there. So the idleness that we got was around 70%. We can see that there was still 70%, 60% of idleness into the CPU. So things are really performing well, but there's a big problem with the softwares that we are going to use onto this machine. So if you're going with any of the Autodesk softwares specifically that are made for the Windows platform, do not go with this machine. So that would be my final conclusion for everyone over here. So guys, if you've got any more questions, please leave that down in the comment section below. And if you've got any more opinions, by the way, on this topic, please leave that down into the comment section below. We'll be happy to read that and reply to you. And if you liked our video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Meet you in the next episode. Till then, goodbye.